Good morning and welcome. I'm Daphne Richards, Travis County Horticulture Agent with the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. Thank you for joining us for this webinar and our Texas Tough Plants series. We've got a great program lined up for you today, Trees, Your Landscape Legacy. As part of this program, our presenter may refer to various source material or websites. Don't panic if you don't catch those in time to write them down. Please just relax and enjoy the webinar. All registrants will receive a follow-up email chock full of great stuff, including a link to the recorded sessions and links to any references or resources listed. Today, we'll be taking your questions at the end of the session. To pose a question, you'll need to use the Q&A feature. Simply type in your question at any point and we'll address them at the end of the program. We'll get to as many of your questions as we can, and we'll follow up after the program on any that we run out of time for. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming our presenter, Yvonne Schneider, Travis County Master Gardener, Tree Specialist, and Texas Superstar Plant Specialist. Two designations that she earned by attending intensive advanced training on those topics. In her presentation, Yvonne will explore the many benefits that trees provide for your personal property, as well as the general environment. A special focus will be placed on choosing the right tree that's well suited to Austin's climate and soil conditions. Yvonne, I'm excited for you to be here today and to learn more from you about tree care. So the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Daphne. Let me go ahead and start sharing my screen. All right, so hopefully everybody can see that now. So I chose the topic or the title, Trees, Your Landscape Legacy, because the trees that you select for your yard, or maybe that you've inherited in your yard, is there to stay for quite some time. So it can actually create a story for your family. In fact, I have a neighbor down the street who actually plants a tree for every grandchild that is born. And I thought how sweet that is, because it truly does develop a connection to that property and to that homestead. So hopefully you'll see something in the presentation today that might create an idea for you to create your own landscape legacy going forward. Okay, so there are three topics, as Daphne mentioned, that I'm going to cover today. And one is tree benefits. Then I'm going to talk just a little bit about tree care basics, because there's a lot going on in the Austin area with tree care or tree issues. So I wanted to address that a little bit. And then I've selected a number of trees that are very appropriate for Central Texas. I can't cover them all. We have actually quite a variety of trees that we can select. But I thought about a few that I'd like to share with you, and hopefully you might just open up your ideas to create more beauty in your landscape going forward. So let's start with tree benefits. And I started with air quality because I think it's intuitive and most people think about that. But before we get into the full plethora of benefits that I think trees do provide, or I know trees provide for us, I want to start with a little bit of a story. And hopefully, as we go through the benefits, maybe you can take a mental note of some ideas or benefits you think that this story might have in context. So I have a neighbor that recently bought quite a bit of property, several acres for a matter of fact. And it was pretty much covered with our local cedar trees, what we call our cedar trees. But also had a lot of oaks available too. And so he wanted to clear the land, not completely, but just of the cedars, so that he can open up more variety and plant other types of trees. But he also wanted to keep the land open for almost as a wildlife habitat. Really wanted to keep this land pristine. But he did do some clear cutting of the cedars. And later he asked me, Yvonne, do you think I took out too many cedars? So as we go through this, toward the end of the benefits, I'm going to ask you to think about, what do you think I said to him? And there were, actually some of the learnings that he might have uncovered. So as we start on just the benefits of air quality itself, I mean, think about what trees do for us just in general, and that's, you know, aesthetics. I mean, I love to go out. Look at this picture here, this creek with the beautiful greenery and the shade that the tree is providing. But I think we also understand that most of our property values are increased by having mature trees on the property. In fact, if you ask the insurance people out there, they'll probably tell you a mature tree, each mature tree adds about $1,000 or so to the property value that you have. So again, it's, you know, something, an economic benefit as well as a, you know, a quality benefit. So if we look at the trees and just the air quality it provides, and I think Austin, we're very, the whole area around Central Texas and Austin, we have a lot of clear air days. And I spent over 25 years of my life in the Houston area where we didn't have as many clear air days. So, you know, we may start looking at our canopy around the Austin area and saying, you know, is that actually helping us out? And the answer is, it sure is. I mean, trees are not only providing us oxygen, you know, turning our carbon dioxide into oxygen, but it is sequestering carbon monoxide. You can see the ground level ozone layers that we have, sulfur dioxide, and particulate matter. And particulate matter could be, if you remember, you know, a couple years ago where you had all those fires in Mexico and all that ash came up and kind of gave us several cloudy days. And they kept saying if it would just cross a mountain range, because it's the trees that would actually filter out the ash from the fire. That's a particulate matter. You know, our pollen can be particulate matter. And you might say, well, you know, come on, the trees are giving us some of that pollen, and that may be true. But there's other shrubs out there that generate pollen as well. So again, the trees are helping to sequester that. In fact, I thought this was a very interesting finding from the USDA Forest Service that says each year, 100 large mature trees removes 17 tons of carbon dioxide and 137 pounds of other air pollutants. So that's every single year. This is the amount of air quality, air purification that the trees are providing for us. So again, as we think about clear cuttings, you know, let's think about, okay, is that going to disturb what we value here in the Austin area from an air quality standpoint? Okay, but we're not just talking about air. Here in the Austin area, we have several lakes. I happen to live very close to one, and we have very pristine water. In fact, we live on aquifers. I myself have a water well. And so I'm very concerned about the quality of the water that I'm generating up from an aquifer. So it is good to know exactly what the trees are providing us from a water standpoint, because that's probably a lot less intuitive than the quality of air that the trees provide. So just to give you a perspective here on the trees, you know, in Austin, it seems like we have either drought or flood. I mean, last night we had a pretty good, I wouldn't call it a flood. I think we got almost an inch in my area, but, you know, that's after 6 weeks of hardly anything. So what the trees actually help do is manage those flood stages. So you don't think about it, but the leaves, the foliage of the trees are actually capturing and holding a lot of that water as it's running down, you know, from the rain. And you can see here, it actually helps about, for every inch of rain, about 17% reduction over 12 hours. So it is holding on to that water. And, you know, the trees actually absorb, the leaves actually absorb that water, creating the sugar and the benefit and coming back in, give energy for the tree, or it may transpire it off as well. So again, it's helping to absorb some of that water, but also slow down the rate and the speed of the water coming through. It also, especially along our riverbanks, it may, you know, well-placed tree can help route the runoff. But what I actually like, and I see every single day, is that the placement of trees, the roots actually helped to keep the soil from eroding away. And I live on limestone rock. I may have 4 inches of soil or 8 inches of soil at some point. So the fact that these trees are helping me keep that soil on top of this limestone, and actually as it comes into the riverbed, is a tremendous benefit. In fact, we don't think about it, but our lakes are also great fishing expeditions, right? So I have a neighbor that literally bass fishes almost 3 times or 4 times a week. So the bass, the catfish, all the other wildlife that's in the lakes here, the roots actually help create a habitat, a wildlife habitat for the fish to lay their eggs and, keep them away from the other predators that might be in the water. So there's a lot of advantages that the trees are actually, providing to our lake systems up here in Austin. We want to make sure that we, again, think about that as we start removing some of the maybe trees that we're not as happy with, such as the cedars, if you will. Also looking at other benefits, again, it's not just talking about air and talking about water, but we are talking about our wildlife habitat. And we have quite a variety of wildlife. So we talked about the fish and some of the wildlife that the water, the benefits from the water standpoint, but let's look up. We have a huge amount of quantity of birds in the air. And, the trees actually provide quite a bit of, a relaxation point for the birds, a place for them to perch so they can look for their prey. I actually have owls in my area, and I love listening to the hoot of the owl early in the morning. And I didn't realize, but they actually, the type of owl we have, the screech owl, has to nest at least 20 foot up or higher. So, if you don't have a tree, then you're not going to have owls in the area. So again, it's those kind of things we want to think about to make sure that we're considering all aspects that a tree provides, whether it's for the squirrels to come and nest around or the raccoons. But again, you have all types of wildlife habitat that literally depend on the trees. Even ants will nest in the trees, a rotting tree. And we also talked, we also have soil erosion. We talked a little bit about in the water, how the roots keep it. But I think also, if you've ever pulled a plant out of a pot, a container, when you're buying a nursery, and you notice that the soil is actually clinging to the roots are actually clinging to the soil, that exact thing happens in nature. So the tree's roots are actually creating the retaining, holding on to that soil. So for those of us who are actually sitting on thin soil, even if it's not in the water, up on a hill, it is actually holding on to that soil and, basically keep it in place. So, we don't think about that as we think about the trees, but they're actually creating a mesh. In fact, most tree roots are in the top 12 to 24 inches of soil around here. So that creates quite a bit of a net to keep that soil in place. Climate, the other thing we don't think about as much is that, or maybe we do, I kind of think about it, is the fact that we're getting shade, we're getting a temperature reduction. So just a shade of a tree can give you up to a 25-degree Fahrenheit reduction in heat. So I'm actually one of those people who in a parking lot, in a store parking lot, I will, if there's a shade tree, a tree in the parking lot, I will go find that parking place and walk a little bit further, because I know when I come back, if I got a few groceries that I'm trying to, if I'm making multiple stops, I know that's going to give me a lot of relief from our sun and our summer heat that is out here. So again, the tree canopy can give you quite a bit of relief, temperature relief from that perspective. Also, recreation. I mean, how many of us haven't swung on a swing that's in a tree or climbed a tree as a young kid? So there's quite a bit of benefit that at least our children are seeing and we grew up with. And, typically where do you see picnic tables? You see them underneath a tree. So again, that's kind of a dovetail between the climate, temperature reduction, as well as the recreation. But again, trees provide a lot of benefit that we just don't stop and think about all the time. And then wood products. I mean, look around the room you're sitting in right now. There's a good chance that your home, if that's where you're at, or your office building was actually constructed by wood products, right? The lumber. But also look how many items in the room is probably constructed of wood, whether it be a decor item or, furniture itself. So it's something, again, we don't stop to think about, that we rely so much on trees to provide in our everyday life. In fact, I thought this was so interesting. I had a chance to go to France and look at the winery country there. And that's when I learned that the French oak tree is actually on the endangered species list because of overuse in the cooperage industry. Cooperage meaning that's creation of wine barrels or barrels. So again, they over harvested the French oak to produce wine barrels. And so now, even the French have started to use American oak to create their wine barrels. So it's really funny that you start seeing that, people don't realize this. And now the French are very protective of their French oak as they're trying to regrow them at this point. And, now we have to think about that as well, because a lot of our American oaks are now being turned into wine barrels. One thing I didn't think about from a benefit of trees until I actually took the advanced training was the association with mental health. And I really, when I stopped to think about it, I thought, well, this probably is intuitive. I just didn't think about it, but it does reduce the stress of living in the city. And that's why you see cities like even Houston and Dallas, and think about Central Park in New York City. It's creating an area for families to go to, for families to relax, because it's actually been proven that if you go outside and get amongst nature, your blood pressure goes down, your heart rate actually slows down a little bit. So, again, this is where you see reduction in domestic violence, increase in social interaction. Obviously, we go outside to play, right? And actually a feeling of safety. When you're feeling comfortable, you just have that feeling of safety. And that's where you have the reduction in blood pressure and such. But I never thought about the association. And there's so many studies going on between mental health, nature, trees, etc. That here, the ADD, ADHD, that they can see a direct reduction in the levels of ADHD if they can get those diagnosed with it more in nature and spending more time amongst the nature, and specifically trees. So again, something that we may not have thought about, but there are studies that are continuing almost every day on this topic. And if that doesn't give you an idea of why you might want to add a tree to your landscape or keep a tree in your landscape, they save energy. It's, let's look at the pocketbook at this point. And I love this schematic from the Arbor Day Foundation, because I think it does a very good viewpoint around the right tree in the right place. So in this case, think about your larger trees being more towards the west side of your house, because as that west side or that west sun comes in, when the tree is in bloom during the summer, then it is shading your tree. And as you can see, can provide up to 30% savings in energy costs for that. But also if it's a deciduous tree, one that loses its leaves in the winter, it can allow that west sun to come in and help you warm the house. So again, trees can provide benefit year round. And if you think about, placement of the trees, the types of trees you want, then that gives you the opportunity to see the full round of benefits. And what I do like around here too, or the schematic, is that it does bring into account that if you have a utility line, be cognizant of the type and size of tree or shrubs, and for that fact, that you put underneath that, so that you don't have to worry about pruning. Okay, so just something to think about. And again, the Arbor Day Foundation is a great foundation for looking at this, and also reforesting where across the United States where we've actually lost forests, such as in Bastrop County, where we had the fires a couple of years back. So hopefully you've seen that more trees does equal a cooler and greener community and give us quite amount of benefits. So let's go back to my neighbor's quandary, if you will, about the fact that he and she actually clear cut a large number of their cedars. So as we kind of went through the benefits, I don't know if you were jotting it down, and this would be a point if we were live, that I would actually ask you, okay, what benefit do you see, or what issue did you see that may have been affected by the clear cutting of the cedar trees? So the first one, and probably one of the more severe one that they did see after the cutting of the trees, was the soil erosion. So being up in around Travis, Lake Travis, where it's a very slopey area that we live in, and those cedar trees were actually holding on to a lot of that soil. So even though he had a lot of oak trees on the property as well, I would say probably 70% of the forestation of that property was cedars. So again, he lost a lot of the soil retention as some of the rains came. And second, it actually was the water. So he saw a lot more runoff from that because he didn't have the foliage from the cedars to slow down the water rate when it was raining around here, when it does rain around here. And so again, he had a lot more runoff going on. A third one, and I didn't really talk about this too much, but it has to do with how trees grow up and the symbiotic relationship that trees have. So he actually lost his sun protection for his oaks when he took out those cedars. So a lot of the property was west facing. And so you get that heavy west sun coming in, and those oak trees grew up amongst the cedar trees. So the trunks were actually receiving a great deal of sun protection from those cedar trees. So what happened, let's say like last February when we had that big freeze, that everything froze really well, and then the west sun came in, and he had a lot of popping of bark off those oaks because they actually were so cold, and then that warmed up too quick. Again, they didn't have that filter of the sun from the cedars, and so he had a lot of bark issues, trunk issues. So again, that's sun protection is another thing, and that's more about how if the trees grew up together and what kind of protection trees grew up with. The fourth one, and I'm seeing it today because of the heavy winds that we have out there, was wind protection. The cedars actually were a barrier of, or created a wind barrier against those heavy north and northwest winds that come into this area. So it was a lot, his area was a lot windier than he'd ever seen before. And his trees, some of the younger trees are actually getting some wind damage. I mean, literally starting to blow over. So again, that's another thing that a well-placed tree can be a wind protection for you. And last but not least, and you may have thought of some more, but it was the wildlife habitat. When he took out those trees, we have a lot of white-tailed deer in the area. We used to have wild turkeys, and I don't hear them anymore. So I think they just had to move on because, again, they lost their habitat, they lost the protection. And we've also seen where the deer have moved on to other areas. And, the raccoons too seem to be a little bit less populated around here. And I used to see a little bit more armadillos, but I'm not too sure that was because of his cedars being around. But again, where he was hoping to have created more of a wildlife habitat, actually we lost a little bit in the interim. So just again, we don't always think about the consequences of taking out a tree or even of the benefits that we might be creating if we do add a tree to our property. So hopefully I gave you a couple of things to think about as we begin to talk about just the trees in our property here. So I'm going to move on to tree care basics. And again, there's quite a bit we could talk about here, but I wanted to hit some of the highlights just because, again, you may have trees in your yard that you're thinking about, and there's been a lot of questions about how much maintenance does a tree require. And the answer is, most trees were here before we were, so they kind of know how to take care of themselves. But there are some things that we can do to help this along. So the very first thing I put up, because I see, and it seems to be a philosophy, you either don't prune at all, or I have friends who want to prune every single year. And the question I always say is, why are you pruning? There really is, we need to think about it, because, and one of the takeaways I hope you do get from today is a prune is a wound, right? It's not too different than you cutting your finger, right? So when you do prune a tree, you're creating a cut, and that cut is a wound. And the tree does have to heal itself from that wound. And it takes some time to do that. So we need to think about, when we do create those wounds, how often do we want to do that? And then why are we doing that? And I do want to have, I guess, 2 PSAs, public service announcements, as we kind of talk a little bit about pruning here, is never, ever, ever prune if you have a limb or anything on a tree touching a utility line. Leave that up to the utility company. Call them in. You can also call in an arborist or someone else to be with them to talk about where the cuts are going to be. But just don't try it yourself, because that's just too risky. And the other thing I would say, public service announcement, is only prune at the times that are appropriate. And so the best time to prune is going to be when the tree is dormant. So around here would be December, January, maybe November, December, January. But we never want to prune when it introduces either insects or diseases to the tree, or fire blight or anything like that. So again, think about that. Think about the timing. And the other thing I want you to take away today, and we're going to talk a little bit about oak wilt, but do not prune February through June. So a prune is a wound, and do not prune February through June. It's a little jingle you can just keep remembering. But getting on to why would we want to prune, there's really only 3 reasons that we should be pruning. And one is safety. And safety is, basically we want to prune to make sure that we're removing any branches that could fall. So if you look at this tree on the right here, you can see that there's quite a few branches, and it's near a building. So maybe it's overhanging the roof, or maybe it's actually overhanging a sidewalk at a very low angle. So you might want to prune for safety, because you don't want that limb to fall over. You also want to trim branches that might interfere with line of sight of streets. So you might have a tree that's right on, your driveway, or right on the street, and people can't see around it. So you may be asked to prune from a safety standpoint. And also, as we talked about, you may want to prune anything that grows into a utility line. And again, we want help with that. But we've seen what happens when limbs do actually fall on the lines, and the implications of that. So that's about the only reasons we would say, from a safety standpoint, that you do want to prune. So the second reason you'd want to prune is for health. So again, health is not our health, it's for the health of the tree. So, several years ago, we had that huge hailstorm that came through central Texas. And so there were a lot of broken limbs. Oh, the ice storm from last February, right? Tons of broken limbs around. Well, you do want to take those off, because any type of breakage like that does allow insects and maybe diseases to enter the tree's trunk and such. So it could actually harm the tree going forward. So those would be reasons we'd want to actually, prune from a health standpoint. The second health opportunity would be if it's for the longer life of the tree. So again, looking at this tree on the right, there's a lot, hopefully you can see my arrow, but there's a lot of extra limbs. So this particular type of tree has very bad branching habits. And so this would have been better to have trimmed some of these limbs off as it was younger, right, before it got so many limbs there. That would be for the health of this tree, so that it can grow up and, not potentially have all these broken limbs in the future. So that might be one reason we would want to do it from health. And the third point, or the third aspect that a reason we might want to prune is for aesthetics. And let's be frank, most of us are pruning for aesthetics because we want to raise the canopy of the tree, right? We want to be able to maybe mow underneath it, or we just want to raise the canopy itself. Or we just want it to look a little bit differently. We want to open up the crown, let's say, for we may be running or growing turf underneath. So, ideally, I mean, that's the only three reasons. And to be honest, most people are doing it for aesthetics. So again, when we are pruning, typically it does take time for the tree to recover from that prune. So let's not do it too often. In fact, one would say 1 every 3 years is about the right timeline if you're going to do it. But if you need to do it at all, and again, if you are thinking about pruning, it should be for one of these 3 reasons, and hopefully the top 2 are the ones that are driving more of the decisions, but we get the aesthetic aspect. And in fact, we'd say the prettiest tree is one where 2/3 of the foliage is on the top and 1/3 is trunk. And again, the tree doesn't care, but that's kind of what our eyes are seeing from an aesthetic standpoint. So again, do not prune February through June, and a prune is a wound. So as we move on, let's talk a little about caring for a newly planted tree. So I'm going to assume that some of us want to add a few trees in our yard. And so the picture I have here is one I just planted, probably November. I got this tree, very, very small tree. And so one of the first things you want to think about is never prune the first 2 or 3 years. And the reason we say don't prune is because it's establishing its root base. In this case, this was a container tree. And so the root base needs to actually be established before I start taking off any limbs, because for every limb on that tree, there's going to be a root. So the more limbs I have, the more roots I'm going to get on that tree, the healthier that tree is going to be. And in fact, if you can see it, if I can see this, there's actually a little bitty limb right here. And that's way low. I mean, I don't want that limb down the road, right? But this is what's called trashy trunk. Leave that branch, because again, that's more root. That's another root that I'm going to get for that tree, especially, and it's probably going to go in the direction of the limb. So I'm getting limbs, I'm getting roots all the way around that tree to help it to be able to sway in the wind. Again, I live in a very high, windy area. And so I want that tree to establish as many stabilization roots as it can before I start trimming it for my aesthetics, right? Or in this case, it'll be a little bit of safety, because I don't want, people bumping their head on that limb going forward. So the only thing you would prune at planting time would be defects. And the only 2 defects I can think about is if I broke a limb, or a limb breaks while you're actually planting the tree, which can happen, obviously, because we're handling it. Or let's say the tree did not have a single trunk. And in this case, you can see there's a little cane rod, because this is a very small redbud tree, by the way, and trying to establish that central leader. So by having a little bit of guidance on it the first couple of years, I'm actually making sure that I get that single trunk going up. So if I had bought a tree that had, and this is very common in like live oaks, where you have 2 trunks, there's no dominant trunk. When it's young is when you'd actually like to take one of those out, so you leave one to get a 1 dominant trunk, and that's just a healthier trunk on the tree. So that's about the only two things you might want to consider to do at times of planting. Now, the other question a lot of people have when caring for a newly planted tree is about watering. And I don't really like this, water every 10 days, because it's really more about the amount of water that the tree needs. And so in this case, I like the next bullet point a little bit better, which is 1 gallon per inch of diameter at breast height. You'll see DBH, that's kind of a common forestry term. So that's diameter of the tree at breast height, which may be 4.5, 5 foot. For me, that might be like 4 foot. But again, that's the diameter you're measuring. So if I have an inch, let's call this 2-inch trunk, it's probably not quite that. That would be 2 gallons of water I'd want a week on that tree as I'm establishing it. But the key point is don't go dump 2 gallons of water on it, especially in our areas, because it needs to be very slowly so it can seep in. So what I like to do is put maybe a quarter of that on there, and that breaks the surface tension of the soil around it, and then come back and put a little bit more 30 minutes later, let's say, and then that's when the water starts absorbing down into the ground. And again, I mentioned, your roots are in the top 12 to 24 inches. So you want to make sure that that water is getting down as far as 24 inches into your soil. So again, really a gallon is not that much for an inch. But let's make sure that it's actually getting into the soil and being absorbed down into the soil, and not just running off the hill or running off, down into the grass. So again, that's really what we're focusing on, is trying to get that water deep. So slow, whether you buy, they have these little water rings you can buy, or like I do, I'll have a sprinkling can, and I'll visit the tree 3 or 4 times to get that amount of water over to the tree. So moving from newly planted, might talk about establishing it once we've got it in. And so there's been a big debate about mulching, and we're going to talk a little bit about that right now. And so what mulching does do, and it's a good thing, and I would say native mulching, is like tree bark or something of that nature. It reduces competition. So what you really want to do, again, as I mentioned, your roots are very shallow. So the competition is for water in this area. So you want to make sure that you're giving enough opportunity for that tree's roots to get the water, and instead of turf or even other plants. So this picture we have up in the right, what it's really showing is, look, there's no turf around this for probably 3 to 4 feet. So there's a huge bed that's around this tree. Yes, I do have a few landscape plants around it. I can't help myself, but that's Mexican feathergrass. So it's a very shallow rooted plant, and it's also very low water usage. So it's not really contending for the roots against that tree as much, a little bit, but not so much. But the thing that you want to see here, and when we do mulch, is that you always see the root flare. So as we look here at this tree, a root flare starts when you start seeing the roots flare out, right, from the trunk. Now, this obviously is a very old tree, right? So what I think was very interesting, and why I took this particular picture, was not only can you see that the mulch around this is allowing the root flare to show, even a little bit of the roots, but some of this extra little root that came along right here. And had I planted this, or had I thought it was planted from a nursery or something, I thought maybe that would be a gurgling root or a circling root, some things we want to watch for. But I believe what this is actually extra roots, stabilization roots that this tree put on, and it is a live oak, by the way, that because of the amount of wind. So the wind is obviously coming from this direction, this way, so toward those roots. And so it actually, to keep it from falling over, I think it's got a lot more roots, and there actually are a lot more roots behind this tree. So you can see the establishment of the root base was much in the direction of that it had to fortify itself from the wind. So that's very interesting. And next time you kind of look at your trees, look at the root flare to see what it's done, because it tells a story. It's very, very interesting. But the other thing when we talk about mulch is don't get it too thick. Again, 1 to 3 inches is all you need, but get it as far out as you can. Like I said, this one, I probably have 3 to 4 foot around all aspects of this tree. In fact, many would say go all the way out to the drip line, which is, where the foliage ends on a tree. But if you can't do that, that's fine. But as far out as possible is nice, because it actually keeps moisture in that soil, and it actually cools the earth. So again, you're kind of cooling those roots as well as keeping those roots a little bit moist. But what I don't want you to do is volcano mulch. So do not do this practice. And we still see this practice commercially done. I think it's kind of a dump and run. Let's just dump that mulch on and we won't have to visit it for several or a year or for 6 months. But what this does, again, think about it. If that mulch is sitting, that almost looks like it's 8 to 10 inches deep, and we only get an inch of rain at a time. I mean, are the roots going to get any water when it's got that mulch on top? So you're actually, it's counter to what you're trying to do. But the other thing you want to make sure you do is never pile mulch against the trunk. And again, you want to keep it out to where you see the root flare. And the reason for that is, and you want to keep it back, at least I do more like 6 inches or so, is because if the mulch is up around the trunk and it feels the moisture of that and the coolness, it actually thinks it's drowning. And the tree can go into a level of dormancy. So there are young trees that have been killed by what we call here volcano mulching, because the tree doesn't understand, it's not getting the air circulation it needs, it's not feeling the warmth in the roots, and it's literally drowning, and that's the way it reacts. So again, do not do this old commercial practice of, again, we just call it volcano mulching, and this is the concept of where less is more. Like 1 to 3 inches is all you need in the mulch. So I mentioned that we'll be talking a little bit about oak wilt. And the reason I want to is because, I used to think oak wilt was, that's a South Austin problem. I live up in the Northwest area, northwest of Austin, not my problem. Until last year. And Daphne and all the MasterCards pretty much know this because, I was on the phone with them in seconds. All of a sudden on my street, we have trees dying. We have live oaks and some red oaks dying. And all of a sudden this came home. So what I do want you to take away is you may see this is not my problem, but you never know when it will be your problem. So just understand what it is, and there's ways you can protect against it. So the key thing to think about with oak wilt is all oak trees can be affected. It is not just a red oak problem. The issue is, though, is that red oaks are the most vulnerable. So if you're not familiar, there are only actually 2 family of oaks. There's red oaks and there's white oaks. And all the oak varieties will fall into one of those. So where we are most susceptible is in the red oak family. That's your Texas red oak. A lot of us around here will call that a Spanish oak. Your Shumard, your blackjack, or your water oaks. These are the oaks that are most susceptible because they're the ones that produce the fungal mats. And the fungal mats are actually the fungus, the disease that actually is killing the tree. And the issue with the red oaks is they will die within 4 to 6 weeks of any detection. So you really don't have time to do anything about it, because by the time you notice it and they get someone out there to try to inject it with an herbicide or fungicide, then it's pretty much dead. So when we see a red oak with symptoms and then get certified that it is red oak, it's pretty much you need to remove it. And again, how do you tell? The red oaks, they'll get at the canopy, the very top of the canopy, they'll start turning that autumn brown or the autumn red that you normally see in the red oak family in the autumn, but you're seeing it in the middle of the summer. And you also might see the fungal mat, but not necessarily. Sometimes the fungal mats are just in the crevices of the bark itself. So unless you're really looking every day, you're not going to notice it. Most of the time, you're going to notice the leaves turning brown. And the way this disease works is it actually attacks the water mechanism that the trunk uses to push water and sugar, if you will, that's up into the canopy of the tree. So normally we see the top of the tree dying first. And again, there's things that could happen differently. This one actually has some of its canopy still alive at the top, but normally because of the way the disease works, it attacks the top of the tree first because the tree can't push the water up its trunk to it, and that's the way it works. White oaks, conversely, actually have some resistance, and they have a pretty good tolerance. And in most cases, they can actually be treated and survive. So they might see some canopy loss, but not to the extent that you're seeing with the red oaks. So again, the white oak family would be your post oaks, your bur oaks, your Mexican white, white shin, your Duran, Lacey, the chinkapin oaks. Again, when you look at your oaks, you can ask, is it white oak family or red oak family? And right now in the Austin area, we're pretty much saying, try to stay with the white oaks because they just have more tolerance, and they do not produce the fungal mat. So they might get the disease, but they're not the ones that can contract it and promote it, right? And I broke out live oaks differently, and a live oak is of the white oak family because they, especially in the Austin area, a lot of our live oaks grow in families of oaks. So I might have, a grouping of 3 or a grouping of 5 live oaks. And what happens is the root systems are interconnected. So if it does pick up fungus, then they are actually sharing that fungus through the root systems. So when one gets it, the others will get it. So we'll inoculate live oaks because you actually have 3 to 6 months once you detect it to actually try to, to save the trees. And in my area, it was I think ground zero was a red oak. And then everything else affected was live oaks because there's so many live oaks just up and down the street from where I live. And luckily every neighbor did inoculate. Once we called in an arborist and had it certified that it was red oak. And the picture on the right, the veinal necrosis that you see, that's basically the red, like the vein and the veining in the leaf is red, and the rest of the leaf is either green or it's already starting to turn brown. We could see this on the street. So the crowns had already started to defoliate, and we started to see these leaves on the street. As soon as an arborist came out, they went, yeah, didn't think this area had it up in the Northwest, but you do now. So great. We made the heat map for oak wilt, which is one of the resources you'll be getting. But the reason that, again, so you can inoculate, and there is a DIY method. There's only one fungicide that's actually scientifically proven. The concern about doing it yourself is you get it done quickly once you detect it, because again, you only have 3 to 6 months, but how much you're injecting a fungicide into the roots of the system and up the trunk. So, you have to make sure you're not doing too much, but also enough to make it work. And so, a lot of the neighbors around here, at least, they all went with the same arborist that got a pretty good deal. And everyone that was surrounding the ground zero area actually inoculated. And so far this spring, fingers across, I'm seeing all kinds of leaves coming back out on those live oaks. They're looking good. But unfortunately, a couple of neighbors, the ground zero neighbor, and then the one very next to it that had several red oaks, have lost those oaks. And so there's been a lot of, and one of the neighbors, I feel sorry for him because he has chickens. And so he's lost his crown, his coverage for his free range chickens, because we have hawks in the area. So he's quite disturbed and trying to decide what to do, because those oaks were, there before he was. So we're talking 30, 40, 50 years ago. So again, this is not something to play with. And why we say do not prune February through June is because that's the time we have these little beetles that like to digest and eat on these fungal mats, and then they'll actually fly from tree to tree. And when they smell a fresh cut, that's the tree they're going to go to. So they're most active February through June. And that's why we say don't prune at that time. Because if you think about it and you're thinking, I can cut my oak and I really don't smell much. Well, think about when you do cut a cedar and you smell the fresh aroma of the cedar, there's still an aroma that an oak is putting out when you're pruning. And so the beetle will smell that and be there in an instant. In fact, the practice used to be saying prune or paint all oak wounds within 20 to 30 minutes of the prune. Now, because we're finding that it's so infectious that, and the beetles are in the area, is that prune within 10 minutes. And the best practice is if you prune, excuse me, paint within 10 minutes. If you prune, paint immediately. So basically come armed with, if you're pruning out, paint it. And the painting can be anything. It can be a paint, you know, a tree paint. It can be the black paint, the blue paint, the clear paint that spray paint that you have in your garage. So the key concept is just seal that wound, because you want the aroma not to be detected by these beetles. And that's exactly how this is being promoted or proliferated throughout the area. So again, we don't paint wounds other than oaks, and specifically because of this disease, and specifically to keep these beetles out. And if you do have a tree that's been that is dead, and we're dealing with that with our neighborhood, it is best to take it down to get it out, because those fungal mats are still sitting there, and those spores can be wind blown as well as mostly by the beetle. So again, it's just key to get rid of that tree once we know that it is dead. And this is one area where I would say do call an arborist, because they're the only ones who can actually certify that it is oak wilt, and they can actually help you with the correction, the proper, you know, if it's a red oak, they're going to say just take it out. If it's a white oak or live oak, we'll try to treat it, and they'll know how much herbicide or fungicide to put up into the tree. And the other key concept here is that you can only actually treat a tree once every 2 years for oak wilt. So like I'm far enough away, I did not treat mine, although I'm watching the tops of my trees very closely, because I was at least 9 houses down from ground zero. But that doesn't mean that someone didn't prune or something didn't break and the beetle's getting closer. So I'm watching, but I'm waiting to inoculate till I'm, you know, pretty sure that it's gotten a little bit closer to me, or I start seeing the first signs of deterioration. And my yard is mostly live oaks, so I do have a chance. But again, I could inoculate my red oaks now, just to be on the safe side. So again, it's a personal choice, and the price is not as much as it used to be. So there is an opportunity there now, that if you're really concerned for your area, you can have it treated. Okay. So again, do not prune February through June. So as we move on, I did select a few trees to talk about for Central Texas. And again, we're very blessed in this area because there are so many varieties that you could choose. But since this topic is Texas tough, I chose trees that I thought would give you a little bit of variety for the area, but also very functional for your landscape, for your legacy, but also might give you a little bit of beauty as well. And again, there's others out there. We're going to give a lot of links for trees of Texas, but these are specifically for Central Texas, and to be honest with you, a couple of my favorites that are out here. But before we talk about the exact trees, I think as you approach the concept of, you know, creating a legacy in your yard is, why do you want a tree? And I've actually worked many plant clinics across the city, and I get this question a lot. Guy goes, what kind of tree should I put in my yard? And I'm like, we can stand here for 30 minutes back and forth with questions. And these are some of the questions I always ask. And so something that you might want to consider as you start planning for adding a tree to your yard. And the first one is for us, you know, do you need a screen? So I have a niece who just bought a brand new home in Dripping Springs, and it's one of those neighborhoods that's brand new neighborhood. Yep, you guessed it, no trees. And so the question is, do you want to look into your neighbor's backyard all the time? So one of the first things I said was, you know, we could put some hedges, but we could also put a couple of trees that are going to give you, in key points, a good screening. So again, a little bit for privacy, but also for windbreaks. So as I mentioned before, with my neighbor losing his cedars, I actually keep a number of cedars around our area for the screening, and it's mostly a windscreen because we get such high winds up where I live. So again, that might be the purpose that you want and are considering to add a tree. Another purpose might be for shade. I mean, we talked about the energy savings up to 30%, of your electricity bill. But it also might just be to shade an area where you want to spend more time. It may be a children's playground that you're kind of looking for, a play area, I should say, that you want to create. Because again, these trees are going to reduce the temperatures underneath them, quite a bit. So it gives you an opportunity to say, okay, I'm looking for shade, and maybe on the west side. And then what type of tree might I want if it's on the west side? Again, because I'm trying to block that sun. Or is it aesthetics? And this might be one where, most of us are thinking about it. We just want the height in our landscape design, right? Or we want something that's flowering at the right time of year. I actually plant for wildlife. My neighbor has bees. So I'm always thinking about, do I have something blooming every time? And, I think about a tree is a bloomer. So it's something that I actually do plant for, is to make sure that I have something blooming at all times. And the trees are one of those things that can help out. I mentioned that, wildlife. So are you wanting to attract wildlife? Are you wanting to have things nest in your yard? I have tons of cardinals in my area, and I know where they nest now because they kind of repeat where they nest. So is it going to be in a shrub or in a tree that you're looking for? So are you trying to create that habitat for that wildlife to remain close to you? Or, for food for the wildlife? Trees, just the white-tailed deer eat the acorns off of the live oaks that are around here. They'll actually eat the leaves sometime too. I'm not too sure that's for food, but they're at it. So again, there's a lot of food that the wildlife need from our local trees. And then, is it for food for you? Are you looking for a citrus tree? Are you looking for a fruit or a nut tree, for nut production? Again, we have a huge peach area industry in our area, so fruit trees are a big deal around here. The right selections, you can actually have a lot of fun with selecting something that your family might enjoy to have on the property. So again, there's all kinds of questions you need to be considering when you do stop and think about my tree selection. And hopefully it's not just the tree that you see at the first tree you see at the nursery. Think about these types of options that you have, but also the associated benefits that you'll receive. So let's run real quick into the trees for Central Texas. And I've organized these into two different parts. The canopy and shade trees, and then maybe some more of the ornamental trees. So the first section here is going to be trees that are over 25 foot. So these are ones that literally will give you more of that canopy, the shade benefit, and probably some of the wildlife benefit as well. Okay, the first one up, and you might not think, elm tree. But again, it's a good alternative for the area. It's a very large tree, 60 to 80 foot, similar width, 50 to 60 foot. It is a deciduous tree. So again, this is one that would be good on the west side because you've got the open branches for letting in heat if it's on the west side for the home, and it's going to block the sun in the summer. Again, it does need more sun to partial sun, so it's a sun lover. But the reason I put it too, it's medium to fast. So, it can be 10 to 12 foot in 5 years. So if you're not planning to be at your location or at your home for the next 25 years, and you want something that will grow up fairly quickly, this could be a fast growing shade tree for you. The thing to think about though, is that the natural nature of this tree is that it occurs along well-drained soils, along streams and riverbeds. So this is considered more of a moderate water taker. So it could have an issue in some of our droughts, but it is native to most of eastern and central Texas itself. So it's kind of begun to live with that, but it will take more of an impact if we do have those prolonged drought periods. And this one that might need some extra irrigation. In fact, it's very interesting. The elm used to be one of the most popular trees to put along the new streets. I think in the 20th century, they were saying that it used to line all the streets. So it's a good tree. It does support our wildlife. You'll see the seeds, buds are eaten by games, woodpeckers, robins, a lot of the wildlife that are all around here. It is browsed by deer, the leaves are, and the squirrels and the foxes and rabbits do love to eat the seeds and the buds. So it's a good wildlife promoter. But again, it is one of those trees that would be a little bit more thirsty than some of the other ones that I'm going to talk about. But again, if you want something that's going to grow fairly quickly, be advantageous for you, give you some energy benefit fairly quickly, this is a good selection. And the way I'm orchestrating this, you'll see that I'll always follow up with a little bit of a slide to give you a full viewpoint. So you can see what the bud break looks like, what the leaf looks like. And as you can see in this one, the coloration that might change in the fall. I also think it's very interesting. Some people really get into the trunks. And so this one also has a very pretty trunk. It's not as scaly as some of our oaks. But again, a beautiful overall tree. The next one I'm going to talk about is the American sycamore. And again, this is native to our Edwards Plateau area. So obviously one that, and I do see a lot of these along the lake beds, if you will. And a lot of people do mistake this one for a maple because it has such the three-pronged leaf and a very large leaf. And again, this is another one that will grow fast. So if you're looking for instant shade, if you will, but it is a huge tree. It's 80 to 100 foot tall, can get, and then width 60 to 70 foot. So again, the taller is because it's probably gotten more water. So if you're more sparse with the water, it's probably going to be on a little bit smaller size. But as this tree goes, it's a large tree. It is one that is used commercially for our furniture and such. So it's critical that we have a lot of sycamores in the area. And there is an alternative, another one for Central Texas, which is the Mexican sycamore. You may have heard of that, the Platanus mexicana. And that's also chosen in our area, maybe sometimes over the sycamore, because it can withstand those drier areas. Because again, this one likes to be a little bit more thirsty. But even the Mexican sycamore could see a little bit of suffering in our prolonged drought. So again, if you do plant a sycamore, just expect that at some point during our environments, our drought and flood series, what we always like to have, you're probably going to have to give some supplemental irrigation. And again, the next slide shows the full point. And what I do like about the sycamore, and that's pretty much a telltale sign that is sycamore, is the trunk. You've got this beautiful peeling of the trunk when it's up in age, if you will, and it turns more of this white color. So it very, very pretty tree, especially if you're into the bark. The next one is probably one that most of us are fairly familiar with, and that's going to be the cedar elm. Again, the tree's height and width is kind of similar. It is a deciduous tree, so another good one to have on the west side of your house. Sun, part shade, and again, growth rate's medium to fast. So again, we kind of selected this because if you don't think you'll be on your property that long, then it is still a plant or still a tree that you can put in and see some benefit very quickly. It does have some drooping branches on it, but it actually has a beautiful rounded crown to it. It is native to our Blackland Prairie and our Edwards Plateau. So again, this tree will grow very well in our area. It loves alkaline soil, and it's adaptable to almost any soil type, but alkaline is one it prefers. From a water standpoint, this one is very low to medium. So if you give it very little water, it'll do fine, but it's going to be probably on the 50-foot side If you give it more water, it'd probably be closer to a 70-foot tree. So again, it's going to react to the environment that it's in, but it can withstand very low water. And what I really do like, and the next slide really shows this one, is it has a gold foliage. I guess I didn't get it as well, but these little flowers, it comes out like a little gold foliage. It's a word that's hard for me to say, in the fall. So it does have some of that fall color that if you're looking for some seasonal change, this one will actually have that. So again, you can see that it's a nice rounded crown, but with some drooping of the branches. So a pretty good sustainable tree for our area. The next one I want to highlight is the chinkapin oak. And this one is another substantial tree, 50 to 90 foot. And the reason there's such a difference there is, again, depending on how much water it gets. The chinkapin can grow everywhere in the state of Texas. That's why it has its Texas Superstar designation. And to be a Texas Superstar, it means that it's been trialed and grown across the entire state of Texas. That's Panhandle down to the coastal regions, east and west. And this one can do it. And this is a white oak, by the way. This is not a red oak. So this is one that you'll start seeing probably more prevalent in the nursery trade around here. It is it's a very tall tree, but the width is not so broad. It's like half as wide as it is tall. So it is a beautiful tree. It is deciduous. It's very telltale. If you look at the leaf structure, it almost looks like a saw blade. So it's a pretty leaf, and it's not too thick. It does need sun. It's moderate to fast growing. So I would say once it's established, it grows fast, but it does take a couple of years to get established. So you won't see as much growth in the first couple of years. It is a fantastic shade tree. As you can see, the wood is used for our posts, ties, even that cooperage for our wine industry. There's wine barrels going there. So it's good for home as well as farm. So you see a lot of uses for the chinkapin oak. And again, it is native to our Edwards Plateau area. So it is fine with limestone and caliche type of soils. So it's not going to have any problem growing up in our area. It does produce the yellow, it is an oak, right? So it does produce the yellow catkins, the little twirly things in the spring. But this one also produces a little red ones too. The red ones are females catkins, and the yellow ones are male catkins. So you have a little bit of that coming out, but it's a gorgeous tree. The trunk diameter can reach up to 3 foot. So substantial, but a very good shade tree. And again, here's your full picture. The bark, you can tell, kind of looks similar to an oak bark. It does have its acorns, and there's our little catkins that we're talking about, and a full picture of the tree. The next oak that I like to feature is the lacy oak. And this is a much smaller oak. So let's say your yard is not as big. You can't take a 90-foot oak or a 50-foot oak. So then the lacy might be for you. So this one is like, let's call it 25 to 40 foot. And again, almost similar on its spread. And again, the less water it gets, the shorter it's going to be. The more water it gets, the taller it will be. This also, native to our Edwards Plateau, is a Texas Superstar. So again, the lacy oak can grow anywhere in the state of Texas and do really, really well. I actually like this one. This one we have at the AgriLife Extension Center. So there is one there if you ever want to see a mature one. It's sitting there on Smith Street there. But it is a slow to moderate grower. So this isn't going to be a tree that you're going to put in and see the full growth within 5 years. It may take, let's say, 15 or so. But it's one that can grow up with a child. So as my neighbor was putting in her trees for her most recent grandchild that was born, I said, consider a lacy oak, because it's probably going to grow up with that child. And it might be kind of fun to watch that happen. But it is a single trunk tree. It's a very well-behaved tree. It it loves limestone. Again, it's on the Edwards Plateau. It's got to, right? It requires very low to low water. So again, this is not one that's going to be hurt by our consistent droughts that we have in the area. Like I said, it loves shallow and limestone soils. I mean, what more could I ask for? And it really doesn't need a lot of maintenance. Now you can actually prune it up, right? Or if you want to raise the canopy, or if you want to prune it a little bit, it does take pruning. All these take pruning, but it doesn't really require a lot of work itself. And again, I think this one is definitely ideal for small urban yards because it does not grow that tall. And as well, it's slow growth. And as a white oak, it is resistant to the oak wilt. So, and being a superstar, again, you're going to start seeing this oak. If you haven't seen it already, I've seen several of them in some of the nurseries. It's probably going to be one more featured oaks that we have in this area. And what's really nice, the foliage is kind of peach colored as it comes out in the spring. And then it turns this bluish kind of grayish green, as you can kind of see. And then in the middle of summer, it takes on this little bit of this smoky appearance. So I like the fact this tree is almost constantly changing. So you can kind of go out and enjoy the view every day and see kind of what's going on with your Lacey. And again, here's your full view. Little bit of it can have a little bit of a twisted trunk at times. Each tree kind of grows a little bit differently. But again, it's really a beautiful landscape tree, and it does produce the acorns, so it's good for the wildlife as well. And I can't talk about shade trees without talking about our live oaks. So again, a live oak reaches typically 40 to 80 foot, but again, almost wider. This is the tree habit where it actually likes to grow out more than it does up. It is evergreen. And if you notice, this is the first evergreen only tree that I've actually highlighted from a shade perspective. And that's why live oaks are actually pretty popular in the area. It has a moderate growth rate, so it won't take your entire life to grow, but it can be a massive tree, and it's environmentally reactive. So if it has multiple ones in it, you might see how they'll lean out and such. Our Texas live oak is the one that has a little bit smaller leaves than the general live oak, but both are actually native to the area. And as you can see, our Texas live oak's native to the Blackland Prairie and the Edwards Plateau. So limestone soil is not a problem. And it does require just very low to low water usage. So again, it's kind of made for our area, and it highly tolerates thin soil. So those roots do not go real deep. They go out. And so that's why when we talk about mulching, especially with live oaks, having a large, going out to the umbrella is a fantastic practice, because those roots do go out. And again, pruning is, because it's a live oak, it is of the white oak family, but because of the shared root systems with a lot of the live oaks, you only want to prune do the hottest or coldest months. But again, for our area, your best time is when the trees are dormant, December, January timeframe, because then you kind of prevent all the issues that might occur for whatever is out there in the environment. And again, the full page view, again, you can see the live oak, the bark treatment of it. We have our acorns, which I'm sure most of us are aware of, and it is a gorgeous tree. And again, it is evergreen, but it does shed its leaves in February. As new leaves are coming out, the old ones kind of fall off. So there is a little bit of a leaf dump. And from my experience, it's like every other year or so, every third year, I might get more leaves than others that dump through. It is a thicker leaf. So it's not one that I typically compost with, which all the other ones, I actually do love their leaves for composting. But still, it's a gorgeous tree, and the wildlife loves it. So it does support all the wildlife in our area, the butterflies and such. So it's one that you may want to consider if you don't already have them. More than likely, a lot of us have them. And I can't talk about shade trees in the state of Texas without talking about our state tree of Texas, which is the pecan tree. So this is going to be the probably most water hungry tree that I'll talk about. But again, the pecans adjust to the area, to the environment. So again, 60 to 100 foot, that's quite a bit of range. And it's because it's really dependent upon the amount of water that it does receive. Again, it is deciduous. Some will say it's more prone to insects and diseases, but I see that more where you have a lot of pecans. So I have a sister who lives in East Texas. I think she's got 5 or 6 pecans on her property, and if one gets it, the rest of them are producing. So it's the key here, I think, is diversity in trees is helpful. But I know a lot of people around here have the pecan trees, because I get questions at farmers markets and events that we volunteer at, and they'll say, how do you get the squirrels not to eat your pecans? And the answer is, if you can figure that out, you've got a winner of an idea. I don't know, but the birds, the mammals, they all love the pecan tree, which is one of the reasons I think that I guess they selected it to be our state tree of Texas. It does grow all over Texas. It is native to our Blackland Prairie, the Edwards Plateau. And again, the stream bottoms or slopes because it likes water. So this is one that I would say, if you've got one and we're in a drought, so consider definitely to have some irrigation available. And this is one that may require a little bit more pruning to raise the canopy, because they can be quite large. But again, if you're looking for something for food, and I'm one that loves pecans, this might be one that you want. What's even better is I've always had a neighbor with one, and I get the pecans anyway. So, but again, it's a great tree. And again, you can hear it's just a beautiful overall tree. It does have the catkins, much like our oaks, but here you can see the pecans fruiting out at this point. So just a gorgeous tree. So I'm going to take a little bit of a change here and move to the small ornamental trees. And the reason I'm moving to that is because I know a lot of people are on smaller lots or may have less land. You may have a house that already has a live oak and or a red oak on it, and now you're looking to augment and you want something a little bit different. So I'm going to feature quite a few here. And again, there's many, many more out there, but these are some of my favorites, and hopefully they'll become some of your favorites going forward. So the very first one I have on here is one I just added to my yard this year. This is one I've been wanting for like 3 years. And I think the Anacacho orchid is I think it's our answer to the dogwood, that if you lived in Dallas or Houston area or other parts of the country that have dogwoods, we can't grow those here. But we can grow an Anacacho orchid. And so this is the one that gives us our beautiful white blooms. And you can see I just took this the other day off my tree. And this one also is a good understory tree. So it could take part sun, or light shade. It only gets 6 to 12 foot high and equal width. So if you're familiar with crepe myrtles, it's kind of on that scale. And again, it can grow fairly quickly after the first year. It takes a full year to get its roots established, and then it grows from there. It's a fairly thin tree. The trunk isn't huge, so it's best protected from the strong winds. But I actually have it kind of in a little wind area, but I do have it protected with a couple of little landscape art objects to keep it from swaying too much. It is a single or multi-trunked tree, so some will say a shrub. So you can actually prune it to the way that you want it to look. I actually leave mine as multi-trunk because I get more pink or more flowers that way, and more leaf. And again, the flowers are typically white to pale pink, but they do, as you can see, they're in clusters. It's more like an oak. More like an orchid. The fruit is a little bit of like a little flattened pod that will come out after the blooms. It is a fantastic source of nectar for the pollinators, And this is one of the reasons I put it in. My neighbors actually raise bees. So I have butterflies and bees in my yard all the time. It is native to western central Texas and kind of into northeastern Mexico. So it likes the heat, it likes the limestone, and it will do well in any of our central Texas yards. And again, here's a full picture view. I just think it's again, you'll probably say, oh yeah, if you've seen dogwoods, yeah, it does kind of look like that. Just gorgeous blooming out. And, I actually think the bark on this one's actually pretty too. So even when it's dormant in the winter with nothing on it, it's a pretty structure. The next one I like to highlight, and I never heard of this. I lived in Houston for over 25 years before I moved to the central Texas area. Never heard of a desert willow. I actually never heard of an anacacho orchid either. But this is a tree that will grow here. In fact, I'm kind of looking at one outside my window right now as it's blowing in the wind, but this can get substantial, 15 to 25 feet. I would say mine's a good 20 at this point, similar width. It kind of has an unequal branching. It just kind of branches where it wants to, but it just has these wispy leaves on it. So it's gorgeous. It is deciduous. It definitely needs sun. It wants sun and it wants heat. The growth rate is moderate. I would say actually once it's established, it kind of takes off. It does fairly well. Again, it can have a twisted crown. It kind of depends on how much wind it gets because it will react to that. And it does, like I said, it has an irregular branching habit. You'll see that in the next photos that we have out here. But it is a gorgeous tree. It blooms in the spring. So I have the light pink, and they have new cultivars coming out now, and they have little darker pink ones and such. But I will tell you, this is a hummingbird magnet. I have hummingbirds all over my yard. I've been buzzed by them because of this tree. But not only do they eat the nectar from the tree when it's in bloom, they literally sit on the branches all the time because it's just a little wispy branch. And so they know no other big birds can rest on those branches. So I have it's a little hummingbird resting place, if you will. So I just love it. And again, it is native to South Central Texas. This tree, however, only wants very low water. You cannot put it in, I would say, heavy clay soil. You cannot put it in any place where it's going to get a lot of water. That's why you don't see that in the Houston area and other areas that gets a lot more rainfall. This, when we say desert willow, we're saying desert willow, which is really great because I've got it on a very gravelly, porous site, very thin soil, and it loves it. In fact, it does not do well if it's overwatered. But what is very nice is that when it does rain, I get this plethora of blooms. So all throughout the summer, I might get blooms coming in and out because of the amount of rain. So it's very reactive to the rainfall that comes through. But again, this is a tree worth thinking about, not too big. And it's thin. So if you have turf underneath, or you need something underneath it, it allows for that because plenty of sun will come through. So here's another kind of viewpoint of see, my tree is actually not quite as wide because it's a little bit windier and some of those big branches have broken off. So mine's a little bit more tall and thinner. But again, these are those gorgeous blooms. And again, you can see what the bark looks like. And again, mine's probably more this color, the little light pink, than the darker pink. But again, other varieties are coming out there. And I think this one's definitely worth a view if you have that kind of thin, gravelly soil and just a harsh place to put it in. Think about the desert willow. The next one, and again, never heard of Eve's necklace until I moved to Central Texas. And again, this might be another alternative to crepe myrtle for those who just want something different. I have a lot of, and the reason I refer to crepe myrtles is they're not native. They grow well in this area, but a lot of people will come in and say, do you have something other than a crepe that I can grab. And so again, this is one that you might want to consider. A smaller specimen, right? 10 to 20 foot. So, and half of that wide, so a little bit smaller tree. Again, that's great for smaller yards or small area, or if you want to make a focal point in a landscape area that you're trying to make. It is deciduous. It will take, again, another good understory tree. You've got the sun, the part shade or shade. So this is another good one that you can use if you've lost a couple of trees amongst another grouping of trees like live oaks. You can put something like this in. It has a slow growth rate. So again, this is another tree that you can grow up with in your yard, or something, again, if you want to have a child grow along. It is very open. So again, it allows sun through it. But what's very interesting and how did it get its name? It has this fruit with a string of shiny black beads that can be up to 4 inches long. So it literally looks like a necklace, a beaded necklace. And they say that actually kids used to use them as marbles, the little beads. So again, you'll see this probably a lot as ornamental. It does have, again, being small, this is another good one that is around utility lines. I should have said that in a couple of the other ones. When they're small like this is an excellent ornamental tree to think about underneath utility lines if you're looking for that. This one, again, native to Blackland Prairie and the Edwards Plateau. So it likes that sandy, loamy, limestone, well-drained soil. It can take clay. We just like, it's going to want it to be well-drained. It doesn't want to sit in water. Its water needs, just like the desert willow, very low. So again, this will do just fine in our drought times. And again, it's a great nectar plant. The wildlife love it. The seeds are poisonous to the wildlife, but they know that. So, your kids, you may have to worry about it a little bit, but the nectar itself is great for the wildlife. And again, this next slide, you'll see a whole viewpoint. So again, this is actually the seeds that are on it. And that's the flowering in the spring. So here's a good picture of those long seed pods that come off. So it's really, it's striking when you see one. It's a very unusual tree, but again, it can be a focal point for your landscape. The next one I want to highlight is the flame leaf sumac. And the reason for that is it's a little bit towards, 20 foot, a little bit taller, deciduous, loves sun, similar moderate growth rate. It is a slender branch tree. Some will can let it grow like a shrub, but it has beautiful fall colors, red colors in the fall and red fruit. So that is why it's so good for the bees. And as you can see, 20 species of birds are known to feed on the fruit itself. So, something very nice to think about if you're going to try to establish a wildlife habitat. And there is an evergreen species, the Rurus virens. It's a little bit smaller than the flame leaf, but again, another alternative. And this one is native to the Blackland Prairie and our Edwards Plateau. So again, loves the dry soil. It wants well-drained sand, loam. It can take clay if it's well-drained, but it actually likes caliche and limestone. So again, this is an opportunity for another very well-placed tree. It has water requirements of very low to medium, but again, it is adaptable to our area, so it can withstand our droughts. And it does sucker every once in a while, so it's one of those things where, kind of like a crepe myrtle, where you'd want to cut those down if it does sucker. But there is this evergreen alternative. It actually requires even less water, interesting, than the deciduous one, because it doesn't bloom as much. So again, there is a evergreen alternative, which we got on here, the Rurus virens. And again, a full picture view for you. You can see the tree and the beautiful red fall treatment that you see. The next tree we have is the Mexican buckeye. And again, there's one of these at the AgriLife Extension, if you'd like to see one in real life. A short tree, 10 to 20 foot, depending upon how much water it gets, and half that in the width. It is a deciduous tree, sun part shade, but it's a fast growing tree. And I've actually seen people grow this one from its seeds. So again, it's could be a tree that you can grow up with. It is normally a multi-trunked tree. So I don't see it as much as a single tree, but it can be pruned that way. It does have a fruit on it. And again, then it produces these round seeds, again, that I think the kids actually do play marbles with them. So it's very interesting that kids of previous times found things to play with in nature. But this one also produces excellent honey from a flower standpoint. So it is a wildlife magnet. And again, it is a good ornamental tree, kind of a specimen tree that you can have out there. And again, it is good for our birds because of the pollen that it has in the flowers. And it is native to our Edwards Plateau. So it does like sandy loam. It will take the clay, it will take caliche, it will take limestone, anything that's well drained. And its water requirements is low. So again, this thing will tolerate the droughts that we have. And again, because it is a smaller growing tree, it is well suited to underneath a utility line. And the full view, you can see how pretty those flowers are in the spring. Actually, gorgeous leaf. And there's the seed pods you have coming right there. The next one we have is the Mexican plum. So again, it's I would say moderate sized tree, 15 to 25 foot, equal width. It is deciduous and a moderate growth rate. It is a single trunk tree, so you don't see as much of the multiple trunks on this one. It does have a spring flower, and you can tell how the age of this one, because the bark actually gets darker the older it is, and it does peel like crepe myrtles do. So it actually has a very pretty bark. And the flowers that come out are just absolutely gorgeous. It's kind of like the red buds that come out, and it attracts butterflies, bees, moths. You see these songbirds, game birds, everything out there. And it is a larval host. So a lot of people do select the Mexican plum because they want to create that overall wildlife habitat. And so you'll be a host to many of the butterflies and moths that are out there. It is native to our Blackland Prairie and Edwards Plateau. So, what does that mean? It likes the soil that we have around here, the limestone soil. It must have well-drained soils. Water, very low to low, so it does well from that standpoint. And it is one of our earliest spring bloomers. So if you want something that's going to be the highlight of the neighborhood early on, right after our short winters that we have around here, this would be one of the first trees that's going to come out and bloom. And let's see, the plums actually on this tree, it does fruit. They'll turn from mauve to purple in July through September. So you actually see the fruit mature. It can be messy as it drops off the tree. So this is one we would say, don't plant right next to a driveway or a sidewalk, because it will drop. But it is also a great understory tree if you have some larger trees in the area. So another one that you can have to be a highlight of your landscape. And here's one of those pretty trees. And you can see the bark, how it starts kind of peeling off as it ages. Very pretty. And that's the fruit right there. The next tree I have is the the red buckeye. And again, this can be a little bit larger, up to 30 foot, equal width. It does take partial sun to shade. Some people are saying, can I have a tree because I have this overhead shade, or my neighbor's tree is shading my yard, but I want something on my own. Here's one that can take some of that shade. It can be multi-stemmed or single-stemmed. So you have an option when you actually get one of these. It has really pretty scarlet tubular flowers. And so this is another one of those hummingbird magnets like the desert willow that we talked about, but it also is a magnet for the butterflies. So it's really a good wildlife tree from a support standpoint. The seeds are poisonous, but again, the wildlife know that. You just need to keep the children away from it. And there is a Central Texas native one, which is the yellow woolly buckeye versus the red buckeye, but both grow well in the area. And again, the yellow one, pale yellow flowers, and a width of less than 10 foot, so it's a little bit smaller tree. The water on these, though, the buckeyes are medium to high. So again, they might need some supplemental irrigation if we're in one of our drought periods. But again, both of these buckeye cultivars love alkaline soils. So they're going to grow in our area. So another good one to think about, especially if you're looking for something with a partial sun to a shade tolerance. And here's a picture. You can see how gorgeous those flowers are. And you know, even the bark itself is very unique. And there is the nasty fruit. So if you're going to have it again, don't put it right next to a sidewalk. And you know, it's funny, living in Houston, I never heard of Texas mountain laurel either, because again, we can't grow them in Houston, but we can sure grow them up here. And this might be our answer to the wisteria that we can't grow here. So again, a kind of a smaller tree, 15 to 20 foot. I've seen them at that size around here, 8 to 12 foot in width. What I like about this one is it's evergreen. So it does give you a nice ornamental structure in your yard year round. It can take sun to part shade. I would say when I see them growing up from seeds, they prefer a little bit of the part shade to get started, but after that, full sun is great. They have a moderate to slow growth rate. What you'll notice in the industry on this tree is you typically only get very small plants because these have very deep tap roots. And so once you get it in, you want to leave it in that location, and they're hard, you know, to dig up and get that tap root. But once it's in, that tap root gets established, it goes from a slow to a moderate growth rate. It does fairly well. Some people keep these trimmed as shrubs because they like the effect of it. But again, it is a small tree. It can be multi-trunk, but you can train it to be single if you desire. It does have beautiful leaves. These purple clusters, flower clusters come out in the spring. It's actually a fairly early spring bloomer as well. But what I love is it does smell like this one says grape bubblegum. It smells like grape Kool-Aid to me. So you can definitely smell the fragrance, and you know when you've passed by one of these. After it does bloom, it has these little hard brown fruit pods. And then once those drop, those are actually seeds that will cultivate. So, you know, it has its own little life cycle there. And I see a few popping up in my yard, and I kind of transplant them when they're young. Or you know, it really takes a lot for those to get started. So it's not like it's a harm at all. It's not much to maintain at all. But the one point here is that the pods are poisonous to humans. So again, these are the ones you want to watch from the kids. But the Native Americans loved them. They were using them in ceremonial purposes because they led for the beads and such. So this is native to the Edwards Plateau. Again, this tree needs very good drainage. It's on the very low water meter. So not an area where you want to put it near a stream or any area where it gets a lot of runoff. It likes very low water. And again, it's one that's evergreen, one of the few that's evergreen. If you want to have a year-round visual in your yard. And again, because it's so small, I do see a lot of these underneath utility lines and used in those types of areas. And a full view here, you can see those beautiful flowers and the seed pods, and yeah, the little seeds when they pop out. And another one that actually has become very popular around here is the Texas persimmon. And the reason for that is it's kind of a moderately sized tree, 15 to 20 foot with equal spread. It is deciduous. It's another one that will take some part shade. So another one that can grow and be of wildlife value in your yard. It is moderate to slow. So it's not one that's going to grow up overnight. But again, it once its roots are established, it does grow a little bit faster. This can be used as a large shrub. It can be trained for that, versus a tree. But again, there is a fruit, sweet, juicy, and it can be eaten by humans. But the birds, if you can beat the birds and the mammals to it, because they're going to try to go after it. It is native to the Edwards Plateau, meaning it loves shallow, rocky limestone soil. It's very low on water, just like the desert willow. So you don't need to worry about this in times of drought. But again, because of the fruit that would drop off on this one, you do not want it near like a driveway or a sidewalk because it can be a little bit messy. But it is a fruit that is flavored by the wildlife. So if you're looking to make a habitat, this is a good selection. And the full view, you can see it's kind of a pretty rounded tree. And there's the fruit, give you perspective. And last but not least, the selection I have is of the Texas redbud. And I just happen to be a fan of redbuds because I love the leaf structure. I mean, it's a little heart. So, I mean, how cute is that to have those types of trees in your yard? It is deciduous. Again, similar to the persimmon, 15 to 20 foot tall and wide for the Texas redbud variety. It takes sun to partial sun. In fact, I would say on the Texas redbud, in our deep summer sun, partial sun's not a bad deal because sometimes they get a little scorch on the leaves because these are such large leaves. But they are actually cultivating new varieties that are more sun tolerant. So I've actually put a couple of those in my yard this past year, trying to try them out and prove them out. And you'll have some varieties too, not the Texas redbud, but other redbud varieties that even have the red leaves, the maroon leaves. And those are a little bit more sun tolerant as well. But these are, redbuds are large, can be large shrubs to small trees. Some have twisted trunks like the one you saw in the picture earlier. That was a redbud. And I'm trying to train it to get a central leader going up. But it can have spreading branches. And if you do get one with a multi-trunk, that's fine too, because that just means you're going to get more blooms and more of these gorgeous leaves. But the attraction of the redbud, many of you have probably seen them. It's the beautiful magenta flowers, very early in the spring. It's great nectar for our butterflies and our birds and our bees and everything that are around. And the seeds are definitely eaten by all the birds. So this is another one that's heavily beneficial for our wildlife. Does get browsed by white-tailed deer. So in my area, because I do have deer, I do have the trunk itself is protected from deer getting too close to it. But it's worth the effort. In fact, there's another one, the Mexican redbud is another drought tolerant alternative. It has just a little bit of smaller leaf and it's a little bit more wavy, less heart-shaped leaf, but it's a gorgeous tree itself. Both are native to our Blackland Prairie and Edwards Plateau. That means they will take from very low to medium. So I don't irrigate mine a lot. I'll establish them the first year and a half, and then after that, they're on their own. It's Mother Nature. So these can take the very low water, and it is very adaptable to our soils here, but it must be well drained. So these will drown if they're sitting in a lot of water. So just be cognizant of that. And again, these might sucker at some point, much like a crepe myrtle. Just remove those suckers, and that gets all the energy up into the leaves and for the flowers, where you really want to enjoy the benefits of that tree. So again, a very easy tree to maintain. And to get a full viewpoint, there's that tree in the spring when the flowers come out. It does have some seed pods on the Texas redbud, but you can see why they call it the Texas redbud, because we do get that a little bit of change in the color as well. And it's a gorgeous trunk. So with that, I'm going to say the trees are your best antiques. And I hope that you do have a legacy to pass on through adding trees to your yard. As you can see, these are shots in my yard. I didn't used to be a tree hugger, but I probably am now, because I've just seen so many benefits for trees overall. And I just hope that you have an opportunity to maybe leave your property one day with more trees than when you actually entered the property. And hopefully we'll do the same. So with that, I will open up for any questions.
Oh my gosh, Yvonne, so much great information. I've been busily scribbling notes and discussion points for you. We've got a few questions also that came into the chat that will prompt us for some discussion. So first of all, just thank you for an amazing presentation. Really,
My
really,
pleasure.
really great information. Let's start by looping kind of back to the beginning. And one of the things that I wanted to thank you for was your great insight into the nuance of some of the benefits of trees that are universally vilified. I think that's plant-wide. There are certain plants that get vilified, but the benefits of them are so nuanced. Looping back to your neighbor and the removal of those cedar trees, and the fact that we really have to think through carefully all of the ways that those trees, what they're contributing to not only our environment. And so there's one little issue, there's a couple of issues with them, but the pollen, that we're like, oh my God, we can't have those trees, pollen. And there's so many other things that they do. So just that, I wanted to loop back to that to make sure that everyone realizes that everything in landscaping and gardening and in the environment has nuance to it. And there are many, many things to consider before either you take out a tree, but also before you plant it. And that was really, as I listened to your entire presentation, that's something that kept coming back up and coming back up. And so thank you for that.
My pleasure. And I'm a cedar fever sufferer, and I will not take my cedars out. What's interesting, a lot of people don't know, only the males reduce the pollens, right? So when you see the cedars that are turned brown with the little pollen, seed pollens, if you will, then those are the culprits. The females don't actually release that pollen.
Yeah. The trashy trunk. Thank you so much also for mentioning that and helping people understand that, especially when a tree is young, you need to leave those lower branches. They're going to get taken off at some point, but they help protect the tree from sun scald. They help it balance it. And that made me realize that we really didn't touch on tree staking and how when a landscaper plants a tree in a yard, or especially in a new home, they will stake it. And that's really not the best practice for trees. I see you nodding your head. You mentioned the fact that those side branches help give it balance and help it sway with the wind. And I would just point out that that helps trees create what is called in the forestry biz reaction wood. It actually helps toughen them up a little faster if you don't stake them. So give a little insight into staking benefits and when you might want to stake a tree, because there are reasons to, and when you don't want to.
It's a good point. So in the picture you probably noticed I had a couple stakes on that little tree. And the reason I did is because, again, I'm in a very high wind area. I can often see 60-mile-an-hour winds. And where I put that tree, although it had a little bit of a wind block from some cedars that are in the lot next to me, it still gets the north wind, which can be some of the heaviest winds that are coming in today. So I did stake it, but loosely. So to your point, it has material that I've got it around the tree so it can't sway, probably more than 90 degrees, but it'll sway at least 40 to 50 degrees the way I've staked it. So again, it's allowing the roots to make the stabilization roots, right? So it can be reactive to the wind, and it's learning to be reactive to the wind, but it's not going to let the thing blow over. Now, never, you should always take those stakes out after the first year, because after the first year, you've really got those stabilization roots now in place, and you want to open that tree up to do what it needs to do and react to Mother Nature. So again, you do want to stake it if you happen to be in an area where it's just going to knock the tree over and it's so young. So it's really the younger trees, but you definitely want to remove it after the first year.
Yes. Very good points. And you mentioned girdling roots somewhat in passing, and I know that that's something that I see a lot. I'll get questions about a tree. Oh, I planted my tree and it just hasn't grown. It's been in the ground 3 years and it hasn't grown at all. My first thought goes to, well, it had girdling roots when you planted it. So let's talk through sort of the strategy or the plan of attack for that. There's a couple of ways. One big one that I try to caution people, and unfortunately they don't call us, as you know, until they already have a problem. But when you're going to plant a tree, the smaller container you can get is better, because if it has girdling roots, it's easier to correct on a smaller scale than getting a big box 30-gallon tree. I mean, everyone thinks, I want a big tree now, but in 3 to 5 years, a 5-gallon and a 1-gallon tree planted at the same time will be the same size. And some of those issues that might come with the girdling roots and being in a container for too long are more easily corrected when a tree is younger. So could you talk through what you want to look through when you pull the tree out of its container? What do you want to inspect in its roots, and how would you maybe address those girdling roots if you've already got the tree and you want to go ahead and plant it?
Right. So we'll just say pop the pot, right? Take that tree, and the landscape people don't want you to do it, but they should actually help you do this. You can pop the pot, look at the roots, and if they're all circling, it means it's been in the pot too long, right? The roots couldn't grow out, so they had to grow somewhere. So the best thing to do is pop the pot, see if you've got too many of those. And if you do, check the next one, right? So it's not just about the way the tree looks up, you're looking at how the tree looks underneath its soil line. In fact, the other thing to check for in a pot is that it wasn't put in the pot too deep. You want to almost see a little bit of that root flare coming out, right? Because if it's sunk, that tree is actually not developing all the root structure it should have, because again, it's kind of being in a little bit of its dormancy state because it's way too low. So we would say look above the soil line and below the soil line when you're selecting the tree. But then when you're going to plant it, absolutely you want to spread those roots out. So you can almost shake all the soil off of that container so that you can check the root structure, and you want to loosen it all up. So I'm out there and, don't be shy, mess with those roots and get them out. And I want one kind of growing out in each area. And, I'll kind of put a little root ball in the hole that is dug, and then kind of flare those roots out each way. If I have one that keeps circling around, the practice is to cut that so it doesn't grow circling. And it's not great because you've actually just, cut off a root, and that root's going to have to grow back. But that's better than allowing it to grow in around, because what will happen, as a tree ages, the trunk is growing an inch or so, right? Every year, your branches are growing wider each year. So that root is growing wider, and it can eventually actually curtail the growth and suffocate that tree, right? And that's what we'll see a lot, is you'll see these roots going around, you're like, the trunk can't grow anymore.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I would say when it comes to being nervous about cutting roots, a cut root will actually branch and create more root hairs. So we're not talking about a big root, as you referenced. Cutting a big root, it has to recreate that. But out at those branch tips, you actually want to disturb those roots as you do by tickling them, as we would say sometimes, or even cutting them if it's really rooted into a container, because then a cut root will branch. It's like pruning on your roots. When you prune a tree, it encourages growth. Same thing for the roots. And you want those roots to branch pretty quickly after you put it in the ground and produce new root hairs, which is where they take up the water. So it's a scary thing to think about doing, cutting the roots. You feel like you're damaging the tree or the plant, but it really is if you do it right. And if you're nervous about that, just give us a call. We'll talk you through it because it actually is better for the tree longer term. Yeah. All right, now let's get into oak wilt a little bit. It was so funny. I laughed on the other side of you when you talked about your oak wilt panic, because I do remember distinctly getting a call from you, and it was an immediate like, oh my gosh, oak wilt. And I think that everyone should react that way when they get oak wilt in their neighborhood. it is something that we've all had to learn how to live with, and there are ways to live with this. So thank you for doing such a great job in explaining that and giving me a chuckle on this side of the camera over here while you were presenting. We did have some questions about what the fungal mat looks like. So I want to let everyone know that in the resources that you get after this presentation, there'll be some links to some sites which will have photos of those fungal mats. So you'll be able to look at that. And this is a great segue for me to say that anytime you're looking for anything that you want to know what it looks like and you want to compare, an image search on an internet browser is going to be a great way for you to do that. So oak wilt leaves and live oak versus red oak, what the pattern is, fungal mats, just Google image search that and you want to compare. And there's really a bunch of great internet images out there on most anything you'd want to look at. So don't panic about not knowing what that fungal mat looks like. And then talking about the sealant on oak wilt, thank you for doing such a great job of explaining that you're trying to get the fragrance to stop wafting. So I just want to talk about, in general, we don't recommend painting pruning cuts because it inhibits healing. But in this situation, we just want to cover it lightly, cover those oak pruning cuts lightly enough to keep the scent from wafting. And so really, we still don't encourage people to use pruning paint because it's thicker and it seals the pruning wound in a way that inhibits healing. So just going to be careful about what you use for that. And don't be afraid to just go and get a spray can of polyurethane, something that will just lightly seal it so the scent doesn't waft. And be very careful about covering pruning cuts, not on oaks. It's not real recommended. So that's a confusing point that I see that we get lots of questions on, is when to prune, when to paint, when to not. Generally, you don't. Again, we're back to that nuance, huh?
Yes.
Yeah.
It depends, right? But yes.
Depends. Yes, we're gonna reference our "it depends" favorite statement to say. We also had some questions about seedlings. You mentioned cedar realms, and someone says, but don't they make lots of little seedlings? And so I would say they are opportunists. There are plants that, again, back to that nuance, we would say, oh, they're invasive. So something like an andina, it invades, those seedlings escape out into our green belts and move further along from birds carrying the seeds. Cedar elms are seedy. They are opportunists in their seedlings. I have a cedar elm in the seedlings to prove it. But also let's think about our oak trees. I already see oak seedlings coming up because it was a mast year for acorns, and the squirrels are going crazy. So we have a high squirrel population because of our high acorn production, and they're planting those all over our yard. So most years we may not have that with our oaks, but some years we do. So every plant, again, you've got to just make a decision on for that reason.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're right. I've got little oak seedlings everywhere. In fact, I pulled up a couple in pots to see if I can actually grow one up. But yes, I mean, those are easy. And if you keep mowing over them, they eventually die anyway.
Yes. All right. You did such a great job of explaining some of those, or highlighting some of those amazing tree and small shrub choices that we have. I just want to say that desert willows are some of my favorite trees as well. Coming from starting my career in the desert, I love all those desert species. And so definitely the way you described that, and they're watering. I have a little more clay in my soil than they may like, but I'm fingers crossed going to try to water them judiciously and keep them happy because they're just some of my favorite trees.
I actually have people ask me, what is that tree? Especially,
yes.
and by the way, it's a great tree if you have a pool. It doesn't shed. Yeah. And those flowers, do not shed as well. So it's actually a good poolside tree to have as well.
And there are some newer cultivars coming out in the industry that may be a little harder to find right now, but have fewer seed pods. That's one of the chief complaints that I hear about that tree, is that they produce those seed pods that can be messy during that one window of year when they make them. But there are some coming out that are less that are more sterile. They produce fewer or no seed pods.
And that's a good point, Daphne, because there's a lot of research going on with trees now. They're creating all these new cultivars. I mean, there's like 1,000 varieties of crepe myrtles out there now, and a lot of them are being designed for more pest resistance, right? So it doesn't hurt to research some of the newer ones that are out to see if they're more tuned to what you're looking for.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks, everyone. We'll follow up individually with any unanswered questions. Thank you again, Yvonne. I really appreciate you being with us today and sharing your knowledge and obvious passion for trees and tree care. And thank you to our attendees for participating. Very soon, you'll receive an extensive email from us, including a link to a short survey, and we'd really appreciate if you filled that out. Your feedback on those surveys helps ensure that Extension can continue to offer these types of valuable programs in the future at free or low charge. That email will also include a link to access the recording of today's session, a list of resources for further study, and links to any websites or source material listed by our speaker, along with information on how to contact us if you have a question. We've got a great gardening helpline for you. Then you can also subscribe to our notifications for future seminars in this Texas Tough Plant series, as well as other AgriLife Extension programs on horticulture and gardening. Until next time, thank you for joining us and happy gardening.
Thank you.